For inviting me to be part of this Labor Fest. I coordinate a wage theft coalition, and I also supervise a workers' rights clinic in San Jose. And I want to talk a little bit about wage theft and relate it to tech and tech companies. But first of all, I think you all know what wage theft is, particularly in San Francisco and the whole Bay Area. But I want to talk a little bit about the misclassification of workers. And you heard about the independent contractor issue. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But the big issue we've also been having is with exempt and non-exempt workers. In other words, they say that you're exempt and you shouldn't be receiving overtime. And in fact, you're not. And so that's one of the problems that we have. And the other one is misclassifying people who are janitors. We had a case where a bunch of janitors that only worked for one company were misclassified as independent contractors. It's also not paying people, having them work off the clock and all of that. Okay. So if you're exempt, you have to receive a salary that's at least twice the minimum wage, and you have to fall into one of three categories: professional, managerial, or administrative, and you have to be doing that work over 50% of the time. If you don't fall into one of those categories, you have to be paid overtime. And often workers, like, for example, cafeteria workers like at Facebook, that flagship, they have called me and they've been told that they've been made exempt, but in reality they're cooking all the time like everybody else. So even though they supervise two people, they don't do that for over 50% of the time. So they're not exempt. And you see that in fast food restaurants a lot too. The professional or artistic, you have to have a license, and that's one category. And I've never seen an administrative, because we work with low-wage workers, but that's someone at the highest level. It's not just an admin, the highest level of the company. And so the other one is the computer professional exemption. That's not for hardware, it's for software. And it used to be that it used to be a lot better. And then when the Republicans got in as governor, they lowered, they made it a lot harder to be exempt from overtime, and that hasn't changed. But for this year, to be exempt for overtime, if you're a computer professional, that's a programmer, and you don't need a degree or anything, you have to earn at least $42.39 per hour, or $7,359.88, or over $88,000 a year. So that's that. And then the misclassification is independent contractor. Typically, if you're working for one company and you don't have your own little business and you don't work for lots of other companies, you're typically an employee. The big test is control. Who controls the work you do? And typically, in most cases that we see, it's the employer who controls the work. And the big example is the plumber. If you're going out and fixing toilets or sinks for a bunch of tech companies, and you go to different companies, they don't tell you how to do the work, they just want the sink fixed or the toilet fixed, then you're an independent contractor. But if you work for a plumbing company and you're controlled, then you're typically an employee. And so there's a test in California, and it has a lot of factors, but that's the main one. So all of you may be familiar with the Labor Commission's ruling against Uber. I mean, the former speaker was talking about the safety net for independent contractors, but I'm still holding out for their being employees. I still think they're employees. And I'm afraid once we start eroding those classifications, we're going to end up with many independent contractors. So the Labor Commission ruled that Uber were employees. They're getting unemployment. There's workers' comp and all that. There's a class action now in federal court in California, Florida, and Massachusetts. FedEx just settled a case, and FedEx was fighting forever, but they finally settled a case involving 2,000 California drivers, and they settled it for $228 million. And what the court said was that they even control the color of their socks. You know, there's so much control there, and that was very true. So, and as you heard from the former speaker, independent contractors, no workers' comp, no discrimination laws, no leave laws, and you have to pay for both halves of Social Security and Medicare. So wage theft is a huge problem. Next, please. Yes, thank you. I started seeing at our workers' rights clinic at least 5 or 6 employees that had judgments from the Labor Commission and that they weren't paid. We have a culture of noncompliance. Employers just don't care. If you're in a union, it's different, and that's why we need unions. But if you're not in a union, it's anti-competitive, it's all those things, but it really hurts workers. I just had a call yesterday, from someone who hadn't been paid in 3 months. And people with judgments all the time come in, and one day, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I just went home and cried and figured we got to do more. And I looked to San Francisco, Houston, if they could do it in Miami-Dade, and they went to the local government and they got ordinances and policies enacted that basically said that we won't contract with you, we'll revoke permits and licenses unless you pay these judgments. So, for example, San Jose is one I know to give you an idea of the magnitude. From 2012 to 2013, over 2,000 workers filed claims with the San Jose office, and there's 16 offices. They were awarded $8.4 million, but even the Labor Commission could only collect $2.8 million. I did a public records request. I have to do a new one between April 2011, 2014, and in San Jose, 1,073 judgments there were for wage theft. So it's like a huge problem, and we have a big problem in our area, but you do as well. And an NBC investigative report came, and they did 2 reports on it, and they have a tab on wage theft. So I want to give you a couple of really awful examples, which, they happen, and they get in the press, but there's also the regular ones. One of them is, you may have heard of Electronics for Imaging, Inc. in Fremont. They flew in workers from Bangalore who worked up to 122 hours per week with no overtime pay, and they were paid in rupees at $1.21 an hour. EFI earned $728 million in revenue last year, and Michael Eastwood, who's still at the Department of Labor, he used to work in LA, and he states that it's worse than anything I ever saw in any of those Los Angeles sweatshops. There's also Bloom Energy. That's a big one in San Jose, and it's always touting its green credentials and how it's going to transform everything environmentally. They're known for their fuel cell power generators. They brought 14 Mexican nationals to Sunnyvale to help refurbish their power generators. They were paid in pesos, equal to $2.66 an hour. Bloom Energy developed its Bloom Energy server, or Bloom Box, over 9 years with $400 million in investments. So those are examples, and there was a whole rash of these for a while. Okay, so, and then I want to talk a little bit about the gig economy, and you already, I didn't know he was going to talk about this as well, but you probably already know about this and then heard about it. Millions of people are finding and doing work through websites such as Upwork, Mechanical Turk, TaskRabbit, and Fiverr. MTurk claims to provide access to 500,000 workers in 190 countries. Unlike some of the other online labor markets, MTurk provides no protection if a worker is not paid. So wage theft occurs regularly. And here's a quote: "In this market, employers can choose to simply not pay a worker for their work product. They can use that work, but then say, oh, it's defective, provide no evidence that it's defective, and decline to pay them." So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the workers are fighting back and using technology to help them. And I have two examples. One is with no recourse through MTurk, the workers who used the site collaborated with computer graduate students from UCSD to develop their own tool. And it's called Turk-Opticon to rate employers. This tool has been an effective deterrent against wage theft, the researchers learned. And so this is a way that they pointed out who commits wage theft. And so people that are using those sites can go to places, at least, where there's not wage theft, or at least it's not as rampant. And the researchers found that their salaries went way up when you compared it, because of course the ones that weren't paid made less. There's organizations like Freelancers Union and websites such as Glassdoor and Contratados, which help Spanish-speaking workers avoid abusive employers and understand their rights. When I was preparing for this, I just learned about that website for Spanish-speaking workers, and I think that's something that, you know, we need to publicize in our area, because in our law center, the majority of workers that are exploited are monolingual Spanish-speaking workers. We also see a large proportion of African-American workers. It's only 2.8% in the Silicon Valley area, but yet we're seeing 6% at our clinics. So we're seeing a lot of exploitation. We also have a clinic for Filipino workers as well, and we see a lot of abuses in the domestic work industry as well, and also with Vietnamese workers, because we have the largest population outside of Vietnam, and we see nail salons. Yes?
Where does Contrados get its funding?
I have no idea. I just found it. I think we're going to have to look into this. I know I'm going to talk in a minute about Our Voice, and we're using that to well, let me get to that. And that guy is doing it on his own right now, and he's not charging. He's working with Farm Worker Justice and with us, and they're giving it to us free, but they're getting grants, was my understanding. And so I don't know, but that's something that we should learn about. And maybe from, I don't know, maybe from unions, but we'll have to check. Okay, now H-1B workers, I know that a lot of people think that they're in really privileged situations, but actually 65% are in the computer field, and the problem is that they can be forced to return home, which you probably know, if terminated, and therefore they don't file claims. And there's these things which you probably also know about called body shops. They exploit guest workers. The DOL says that in 2009, a large number of wage and hour complaints were related to body shops. Those are staffing companies. And the DOL found in 2014 that body shops often house up to 10 workers in small apartments. Pay is withheld from paychecks and illegal fees charged. Enforcement is hard since body shops often contract with third parties who are not liable. And the big one is this Tata Consultancy. They applied for 7,279 H-1B visas in 2013, and there was this class action lawsuit. And the lawyer said it comes down to people not getting paid what they're promised to get paid or what they should be getting paid, and that's actually the experience we've seen for a lot of people, where people have come forward and company officials have told them, if you complain about this, if you don't sign over this amount, if you don't agree to this deduction, then we'll send you back home. And one worker who came from India more than a decade ago said it virtually makes these employees involuntary servants or slaves. There's also exploitation for the L1 visa, And that's the visa where there's an employee who works at a company in another country and is brought here. Well, for the H-1B, they have to at least pay the comparable wage to what's paid here. But for L-1s, they can pay you minimum wage. And employers boast that L-1 visa holders work for lower pay, and they tout the advantages and cost savings of hiring L-1 workers. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about our Wage Theft Coalition. We have a lot of community groups. We also have SEIU-USWW, the building trades, and the laborers as part. And so this is the app that I was going to talk about where you can use technology to help us. There was another one that didn't succeed. I guess they didn't continue it, called Worker Report, that we were testing, that where you can type in a complaint. But this one I like a lot better, and the guy seems to be very committed to social justice. As I said, he's working with Farm Worker Justice in Florida, and he's from Illinois, but he came out here and he gave us this Our Voice, which is voice.com. So what it does is it calculates how much you should be paid. So if you give them the time you start, the time you end, and your rate of pay, they'll calculate it. So they'll tell you what you ought to be paid. It also allows you to rate employers in terms of wage theft and things. And then finally, it prompts you, like, have you received your break yet? Because you know you got to get breaks every 4 hours. Have you got your half-hour lunch? That's every 5 hours. Did you work more than 8 hours per day today? That means you get overtime. Did you work more than 12 hours? Then you get double time. Did you work more than 40 hours in a week? Then you get the first 8 hours are time and a half, the next are double time, and on the seventh day, it's 8 hours, time and a half. On the sixth day, it's up to 12 hours. On the seventh, it's up to 8. So it prompts you on all of that. Also paid sick leave, et cetera. Okay, so we, in the Wage Theft Coalition, we address wage theft in Santa Clara County, and we're trying to get, and we have got legislation at the county that they won't contract with wage theft violators. They require them to disclose if they have any wage theft violations, and same at the city. And we also got permit revocation. We wanted license revocation at San Jose City, but they only have a tax, not a license. In Milpitas, they do have a license, and so we're trying to get those revoked. We also got the school district to say they would, in Santa Clara, they would not contract with wage theft violators. And then we did a wage theft report, and we've done direct actions where we actually go to businesses and protest. So the delegations and rallies really help because we did one at this restaurant called Crazy Buffet that had it had 21 judgments, and it owed over $2 million in citations. And there's another Arby's, too, that did that. And so it has helped us with our advocacy because it looks like we're also going to get restaurant permit revocations now at the county because we've also partnered with some people at Stanford that have done, and that's also using data that's helpful. They've done heat maps where the worst wage theft is. They've found the worst violators for us. They've done graphs that show wage theft. And the other day, someone from the county looked at it and they said, wow, you know, these businesses are ones that we go to. And we definitely need to make sure, and they were restaurants, International House of Pancakes, Dave and Buster's, they were like the worst in our area, and Mountain Mike's. And they said, well, we've got to revoke these permits. So it's helping to be able to have people, and the Mercury News picked it up, and so you could see those graphs, and you could see the heat maps and the names, and so it does help, and we've done it for every city. So I finally want to talk about labor unions oh no, I first want to talk about SB 588, and that was Rebeca and Bob's union that was really in the forefront of this struggle to give the Labor Commission more tools so that they can collect, because I told you we had that horrible problem with collections of judgments, and now there's a bond required for wage theft violators who don't pay judgments. They can do liens, and instead of having to go through this whole writ of attachment, they can just write a letter to the bank and tell the bank, give us the money, and they've been able to do that. Also, individual liability, because what businesses do is they love to go bankrupt or transfer ownership to somebody else to get out from under these judgments, which they've always done. Well, now there's yes, they like to go bankrupt or transfer ownership from company to company. It's like a shell game. Well, now there's individual liability. So even if they do that, you can go after the owner. And then there's now joint and several liability for property services and janitorial, which is really great. So Microsoft will now be on the hook if a janitorial service has unpaid judgments. So that is good. Unfortunately, it's only the Labor Commission that can do this, not individuals. We tried the year before to get individuals to be able to do it, and the Labor Commission is overburdened, so we still need local governments, and we also need community action. The more people you have to call out these wage theft violators. So finally,
Do you want to mention the success with Crazy Buffet and how bad they were?
yeah, Crazy Buffet, yeah, it had the 21 judgments, almost $2 million owed. We had a rally, and we had lots of support, and we had over 100 people there, and they ended up closing. And normally we like businesses to be there, but for Crazy Buffet, they basically were having people work for free, and so we were happy that they closed. So that was a huge success that we had. Okay, so finally, there's been organizing efforts. You may have heard about Silicon Valley Rising, and the largest organizing effort was, and you're going to hear about this from Rebeca and Bob, 3,000 private security guards, success at Loop, Facebook shuttle service with the union contract. Facebook approved the contract. That was the Teamsters. Drivers at Apple, Yahoo, Genentech, and Zynga voted to unionize. That's Teamsters. And just recently, and Rebecca's going to talk about this, because they've always, SEIU-USWW has been involved and has been in the leadership of all these struggles. Facebook cafeteria workers voted to join Unite here. So I did want to talk quickly about subcontractors. This is my last slide. According to a March 2016 study called Tech's Invisible Workforce, the number of subcontracted industries in Silicon Valley has grown 3 times faster than local employment. The percentage of Black and Latino workers in subcontracted jobs was 6 times higher than those directly employed by the company, 58% to 10%. And here's a quote from, we have a really good labor commissioner. She was involved in the sweatshop struggles and the human trafficking cases in LA, and she worked for Asian Americans Advancing Justice before she became labor commissioner. She said, the pervasive problem of wage theft in subcontracted industries is, off the chart. She stated that under the new labor code, so we have a new section 2810.3, businesses at the top of the contracting chain that profit from workplace violations can no longer escape legal liability by hiding behind their subcontractors, even if they did not control the work performed or know about the violations. And just recently, just this month, there was a ruling by the Labor Commission that held a contractor responsible, someone way high up on the chain. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ruth, for the presentation. I learned quite a bit from it. See, one interesting question that comes to my mind as a person of Indian origin working in America is when I look at these, it kind of bothers me when I look at the you know, some of the violations. The lead violator seemed to be in that presentation seemed to be Tata Consulting Companies, which is a Indian-owned company, and then there's Bloom Energy, which is started by I think an Indian origin person, if I remember the positive reviews CNN gave it. And that's kind of bothersome to me because, you know, I feel responsible as a person of Indian origin when companies owned by people from the region commit these violations. But I think it's also noteworthy that the American system allows such violations because you don't see Indian companies owned in Europe committing such violations. You see it happening in the United States. So then that brings to mind what are the weaknesses in the U.S. labor regulations that allow companies to abuse it. You know, I kind of call it the marriage between Yankee capitalism and Indian feudalism, if you will. You know, so you know, it's a pretty happy marriage. You know, because if yeah, I've also had anecdotal evidence about a lot of startup companies. You know, primarily founded by people from the subcontinent carrying out these violations, and I think it has to do with the fact that here, you know, the labor regulations and the labor laws are much weaker than in other countries, and none of this should take away from the fact that there are a lot of people, both Americans as well as people from India and other countries, who are very professional, who do not wish to violate the law. And who do not violate the law. So, you know, that I don't want to make it sound like, you know, everybody is bad. You know, so the one thing I wanted to talk about today, I've been a tech worker in this industry, but that's only one part of my life. I've been involved with the anti-war movement, and I was involved with movements against religious extremism in India. I was like, you know, more recently I've been doing things for the environment, and I think we're living at an interesting time because not only are we seeing you know, the problems with creating jobs and having sustainable living for people in the United States and other places, but we're also living at a time where, you know, our environment is being destabilized. And you know, so I was thinking about how can you know, what can we do for better organizing, for better, you know, which is the topic of today, and what can we do to give people a better sense of security, better sense of control over their lives in these times. And I think one thing you cannot have any organizing if you do not have a conversation. And I think I feel like we're living, one of the challenges is how do we have conversations between people who are coming from different backgrounds, and that becomes important to me because of all the examples of unionizing that Ruth made in her presentation, the Facebook drivers and the other examples that she gives. None of them are actually tech workers. All of them are support workers who are working for tech companies. And see, that is noteworthy to me because as you move up the, you know, and if you read the people's history of the United States, you know, I think Howard Zinn, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure it's in the people's history of the United States. He points out that historically during, there are cases where he's pointed out that when there has been strike actions, typically the engineering cadre within these companies side with the management, and they do not join the striking workforce. And I mean, that is a reality to reckon with. Money and education are there for a purpose. They're there to break a sense of solidarity that human beings normally have. And I think that is very obvious because I'm a software developer and I try to keep my sanity by being involved with people like you. But I had a very interesting conversation right now with with a coworker of mine who. And we were talking about automation, and to her, when I talked about automation and its impact on the job force, see, they would take umbrage and cover under arguments like, oh, we're going to have universal basic income. So, if jobs are lost, it should be okay because there'll be universal. Well, do we have universal basic income today? And she said, no. But then are you not worried about the consequences of your action if you participate in automation, that you're going to have thousands of people lose their jobs? And that is not a conversation that they've had. And so I came across to her like I'm from Mars. And because in her mind, automation, anything that can be automated should be automated. It's a good thing. That's a religion. And if I'm challenging the religion, I come across as somebody who is just, who doesn't understand logic, to quote her words. Yes, I do not understand the logic of capitalism. It is a very true statement. But I don't think that's what she meant. So that is one thing, is to, I think as a first step, I do think it'll be good if the tech workers can organize both for themselves and for others. But I think that is for reasons that I just described, I think that is a secondary, in terms of priority, that would be a secondary battle for me. As for me, I would rather, what I do is, where we are having successes like what Ruth described, is the support workers and the people who are working on an hourly wage, as drivers, as contractors for these companies for delivering food and other services. I think that is a good place to start in Silicon Valley if we are talking about building unions and improving labor codes, fighting for better labor legislation, because that's where we have historically had success. We've not had historical success with organizing the engineering workforce in this country or in any other country, at least well, maybe Europe is an exception, but certainly not in this country, certainly not in India. So I think so. That is the one case, and I'd say in terms of the workers in the tech industry itself, this is not to say that there are not people there who are open-minded. We are living in times where, like I said, there is tremendous, lot of the workers in this industry, they are young people who are coming out of universities, and they often have the right ideas. And so, it kind of bothered me when we had this Google, a couple of years ago, there was a protest action against the Google buses, and the Google buses were stopped. And, I was okay with the buses being stopped, but then it seemed like there was no effort on the part of the people organizing the protests to make a point that they're protesting the unequal conditions that has been created by the tech industry, and they're not against the people who are working in those tech companies itself. And I think it's an important point, because it kind of became a binary debate between tech and people outside of tech. Rather, I think the point should be about people in general and the management of these companies and the inequality that the policies that these companies demand create. So I think situations like that are a missed opportunity. I would have rather had a protest while with signs saying that, hey, can the tech workers, maybe can you join us and support us in some ways to fight for better rights in our communities by say increasing taxes on the wealthy and building affordable housing in San Francisco. Those are workable solutions that you'll actually find support among the tech workers. And so so what I'm saying is there needs to be a way to have a conversation between those outside of tech and those inside of tech. And those are some things that I think that people who are concerned about the labor movement, we have opportunities to do better. Well, in a similar way, I was also thinking about what about the conversation between immigrant workers, like myself, and people who are non-immigrants, people who are native-born U.S. citizens. I think the times of inequality are very, very strange, because on the one hand you have the H-1B workers, and like Ruth said, there's on the one hand, sure, they might be making more money, but on the other hand, there's a lot of other conditions which make it very, which can really make life pretty hellish, in the sense that you're held with a constant gun where you could be deported if you lose your job, or you'd be forced to leave, if you lose your job, and it can be a very dehumanizing experience. And the way I thought that we all had our things, and I often find that when people have gone through that system a couple of years, they're often very brutalized, and they're often very brutalized. They stop being concerned about somebody else's problems. They stop, it's almost like this, they just have to survive and type of thing. And the people outside, and the people on the other hand, the people who are in this country who are suffering when they see these tech workers who are often having nice cars or having nice jobs, it's kind of like, it kind of sometimes creates a feeling of, oh, how come somebody from outside my country is doing so well when situation is not really good for me, when in reality the situation is not good for both of them in different ways. And there is not a way, and I think there is not a way to have a discussion. And I think this was very obvious during this election cycle, when there was rightly concern from a lot of quarters about the H-1B visa program, and the way that concern was adopted by the Republicans and the Trump administration, and the way the discussion was framed was around, H-1B visas versus the U.S. workers. I think when we enter the discussion with that kind of a mindset, you're actually making things worse for the American worker. And that's exactly what's happening today. One of the things that the Trump administration has done is they've made it harder for the workers on H-1B visas to transfer jobs. They have disabled the premium processing of H-1B transfers. So when a H-1B worker shifts from one company to another, you're supposed to, the company is supposed to file, the new employer is supposed to file a request to the government to basically have the petition in the name of the new employer, so that they could start working. And before, they were able to pay a small fee and get this transferred in 2 weeks. And now, with the Trump administration, it's taking many months. So meaning that these workers are now much more scared to change their jobs. And if you create that kind of a situation, it gives more power to the employer to exploit the worker. And these things are not even talked about. And if this employee is more fearful and more afraid to speak up for better wages, to ask for promotions, it's going to have a detrimental effect on everybody's wages, including the wages of the American worker. And so this type of a discussion where the human being is at the center of the debate, whether the human being is a U.S. worker or whether they're a H-1B visa holder, somehow labor seems to have lost the ability to have that discussion. And I think that is something that that we can think about, and how we can have this conversation. We might not all be in the same situation. We might not all be able to organize a union where we are right away, but we can still support each other when other people are doing that organizing, and when other people are, and I think basically it also becomes it also becomes a discussion between scientists and those outside of science, and we were talking about the war on science that the Trump administration is carrying out, which is very real. And I go there and I think about, man, if I talk to the factory worker who's losing their jobs because of science and tell them to support science that's under attack by the Trump regime, they're not going to have a lot of sympathy for science, So as much as people in science and engineering, I think need to understand human solidarity, and those in the labor movement, I think, need to stand up for science. We're living in a time where we have to overcome the the artificial barriers that are put between us to prevent us from seeing each other as you know, part of a common human species. And I think the stakes are much higher today than before. So that's kind of what I had to say.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rebeca Armendariz, and I'm a community political organizer with SEIU-USWW, which is United Service Workers West. We represent about 45,000 workers throughout the state of California, mostly janitorial workers. We came out of the Justice for Janitors movement. And now we have airport workers, security officers, workers at the Moscone Center, AT&T Park, and other allied entertainment centers. And like Ruth had mentioned, we just finished a successful but very long, 6-year-long organizing drive to organize the security officers throughout Silicon Valley and the peninsula. We're really proud of that. Bob here, Bob Emmett, with us today, was one of the organizing committee members who stuck through and helped bring more folks in and activate them and get them to be part of the union as well. So we should be starting contract negotiations very soon. Of course, the big tech companies and the subcontractors haven't come to the table yet, so we'll most likely be inviting you all to some actions to push them to do so. It's been 8 months and they haven't come to the table yet. So we will be pushing just as hard on them to come to the table as we did to get them to recognize the workers into the union. So we didn't do this security organizing by ourselves. We became part of, or we helped create something called Silicon Valley Rising, in Silicon Valley, along with Unite HERE, the hotel and restaurant workers, as they organized food service workers. They recently organized over 400 food service workers at Facebook, which we're very proud of supporting because we have the janitors there. They organized workers at Intel, who had a horrible contractor, who fired people, who didn't allow any time off. There was a lot of wage theft, which goes hand in hand with sexual harassment, which we worked on Ruth and other organizations with to push back on. The Teamsters, who organized the drivers, the tech drivers who drive those buses up and down our freeways, shuttling tech workers to and from work. They organized hundreds of workers and took them from paying $800 a month out of pocket for medical benefits to getting fully paid family medical benefits, from $16 an hour to $30 an hour, from having no rest break in the middle of their shifts to having a paid rest break. And so they did tremendous work, and I'm really proud of Silicon Valley Rising and the work that it's done. Because we bring, labor to the table. We have faith groups, community organizing groups, housing advocates. We've got students, we've got everybody that we can at the table to move things in Silicon Valley. You might have heard that Google has decided to build a mothership in San Jose on public land, an 8 million plus square foot, 20,000 employee center. So we are currently organizing to push back on that because our city council pretty much offered them our community on a silver platter and without requiring them to do anything, right? When writing up a memo that explicitly excluded labor from the requirements of who they'd have to meet with on public land, right? The most coveted piece of public land on the West Coast, basically, because it's right next to the train station where Caltrain's going to be electrified, where the high-speed rail is coming through, and where BART is going to connect in San Jose. So it's on a silver platter, right, like I said. And they also are going to expand the limits for how high they can go. So from 120 feet to 200 feet, pardon me. So pretty nice deal that they're giving to Google, and begging them to land in San Jose. So we're very afraid for the amount of displacement that it's going to cause, how it's going to contribute to the housing crisis throughout Silicon Valley, our suburbs too, and what it'll do to workers and how far they have to travel to work and where they live and their families, and of course job standards and our educational system. So we are having our first town hall August 24th to bring the community together to discuss what we're going to demand of Google and how far we want to take it to make these demands and ensure that they comply. So I did want to talk, and I think this will make Karthik kind of happy, is that along with Silicon Valley Rising, Unite HERE started a tech workers coalition and started moving in and speaking to engineers at a number of different tech companies, not just the big ones, but a lot of startups, and we have a good coalition of about 75 tech workers. We had walkouts on, against the president on, excuse me for calling him that too, on tax day, on May Day, earlier in the year as well, in March, where over 400 tech workers came together with service workers and had a huge rally and press event to show their support for their workers. And they've been organizing and socializing ever since. And so we're happily moving, and you're welcome to join the coalition. Yeah, they were able to delegate Facebook and delegate Google and delegate Apple and force them to allow their workers to walk out on May 1st in honor of Workers' Day, so International Workers' Day. So we're really proud of that. It didn't work 100% in every work site because, of course, the subcontractors are terribly power hungry and love to violate the rights of workers. But the tech workers were sanctioned, and a lot of contract workers were sanctioned and allowed to walk out without any repercussions. So, and that was thanks to the tech workers and the work that they did in solidarity with us. That's some of the organizing that we're doing, and then we're looking forward to moving along. Let's see. We have besides the Google fight, we have the Dell, Dell being one of the largest international companies. They brought in, from the good old state of Texas, some building managers who immediately, after we negotiated a really good contract for our janitorial workers at Dell, they brought in this guy from Texas who took all the union janitorial and food service companies off of their campuses in San Jose and Santa Clara. So we've had a huge fight with them for over a year. But like I said, thanks to the organizing with Silicon Valley Rising, they're finally exploring contracting in again with some union janitorial companies. So we have to pull in our politicians and all those folks to help us push them. But companies like Dell don't even care what our congresspeople or anybody really says. They're really untouchable. They don't have any public contracts that they care about. It's just mostly about image. And so with the help of our community allies and such, that's the only way we can push, right? And doing radical actions, storming their lobbies and doing other things. And although it's fun, it brings us back to the question of the immigration status of a lot of our workers. Some of our most radical organizers have questionable status, and they cannot do what they used to do, So the oppression coming from this administration, it gets into our work, very much so. And so we're working with folks like the Wage Theft Coalition, with other organizations across the state to help move legislation to protect our workers at the work site in terms of fighting back, pushing back on ICE. And locally, we have sanctuary cities in the county. We have progressive counties like Santa Clara County suing the administration. And it's been a tough year, but we also had a number of successes, like I mentioned, with our organizing and with the Unite HERE organizing and the Teamster organizing. So, and we have great leaders like Bob, who understand worker solidarity and the need to organize and keep our unions. Let's see. Oh, I have to push this too. Lucky Save Mart. We are fighting Lucky Save Mart because they have brought in anti-union consultants who advise them to cut the union janitors from 2 per store to 1 per store, and have cut their hours to 4 hours, a day. So they're doing twice the amount of work in half the amount of time. And so we are launching a campaign against Lucky and Save Mart for bringing in this national anti-union contractor and doing this to their workers. And we've got those workers from Santa Rosa down to Monterey Bay. So we'll be reaching out to you also for help in pushing back on Lucky Save Mart to do the right thing for those workers. Let's see. I think that's all for me.
I'd like to, one of the reasons I was so enthusiastic about a union is because I can remember what this place was like when we had unions. My memory of the Silicon Valley, it used to be called Santa Clara Valley, goes back to '51. I grew up there. We had strong unions. We had a large middle class. We had a middle class that was literally the wonder of the world. We had good job security. We had good educations. California schools were the best in the nation. You could get a college education up through a master's degree without paying tuition. Up until the Reagan administration, the minimum wage, which was never sufficient, but it tracked productivity increases. The minimum wage and productivity increases parted ways during the Reagan administration. We finally, for the past several years, I've been busy organizing security officers into a union. There's about 3,000 of us now that are organized into a union. All of the security officers?
Just give it 8 steps.
All of the security officers that are working for the electronic companies, manufacturing companies, the ones with deep pockets, are going to be unionized. There's still a lot of work to do. We have security officers working at retail outlets, residential areas, construction sites that we have yet to unionize. There's a number of things we're still concerned about. There's security companies that are not going to be part of the unionization effort. They're going to try to rip off our contracts. We're concerned about Google. Rebeca has already mentioned them. They're bringing in 20,000 workers. This is going to cause the already exorbitant cost of housing to go up in Silicon Valley. This is something I'm very concerned about.
Right to work, you mentioned right to work.
Yes, this administration has launched an attack on working class people like no administration I've ever seen in my life. It's worse than the Reagan administration, significantly worse. It's really scary. That's all kinds of things about this administration that are scary. We were talking about science recently. This country was built on science. To attack it, I mean, that's what made us, that's one of the reasons we ruled for so many years after World War II. There's a lot of other reasons. But our scientific, our technological superiority was one of the things that made us number one. For many years now, our country's been ruled by people that don't understand science, don't believe in it. Frankly, this kind of crap scares the hell out of me. I'm not sure. I know where I want to see us go. I'm not sure how we're going to get there. But I think people like you here are, if you can't do it, then we're finished as a country and as a civilization. I just want to say I hope we can get it. Thank you.
I'm from, my name is Givanas. I'm from the Tech Workers Coalition. I didn't really prepare anything. I wasn't sure if I was going to be speaking today, but I know Bob from our efforts in our solidarity efforts in the security officer unionization process. I was involved with that at my job place. I work at a high-tech company building scientific instrumentation. So it was really powerful to play a small part in that. I'll just read from our info packet, which is at our website, techworkerscoalition.org. Yeah, we're basically a home for progressive and radical tech workers. And to me, a tech worker isn't just like a techie programmer. It's anybody that works in the industry. So if you work in HR or sales or any other non-technical role at all in the industry, I think you're a tech worker. And so I think we need to have organization of actual employees at these companies that can kind of work in solidarity with the important service worker campaigns that are going on, but also at the same time organize among ourselves, build class consciousness. Like Karthik was mentioning, that's oftentimes really lacking in the industry. So we are all volunteer organization. We're kind of rank and file led, like worker organized organization. And so we work with a lot of community organizations and unions like Unite Here, SEIU, Silicon Valley Rising. And then at the same time, we kind of build our own organization through trainings. We trained with the IWW. We're having another one coming up. And we also have kind of like learning sessions with ourselves where we're doing a lot of shared reading, learning about labor history, learning how we can organize ourselves, learning about the tactics of management to keep us oppressed, and learning about what we can do to fight against that. So yeah, I'm just basically here to say hello and meet with some of these folks. I'm really interested in the Wage Theft Coalition. I'd love to work with you guys. And we primarily meet in San Francisco and Oakland, but we recently started having a branch meeting in San Jose, which brings like a little different flavor of tech worker. Up here, where a lot of people are coming from startups. Down there, we have more like heavy Silicon Valley, like old school industry. And we have like kind of small fledgling chapters in Seattle and Boston as well. And we generate a lot of like media interest, I think more than is warranted. I think, I don't know, security officers can be fighting for a union for years and you don't hear about it in the media, and the second a tech worker shows up, you get press coverage. Yeah. So, there's kind of a lot of interest in what we're doing, but I think we're kind of trying to stay, ideologically upright in kind of what we're learning, where we're coming from. So yeah, just glad to be here, and look forward to talking to you guys more. So, yeah.
About immigrant workers, we are seeing a huge uptick since that thing got elected. And what we've seen is threats of deportation. At one of our workers' rights clinic, we had 5 people come in that when they asked for their wages, they were threatened with deportation or calling the police. And the Labor Commission is seeing it too. And as a result, they're processing these cases in 1 month. Well, they're trying to, which is unheard of. If you've ever gone to the Labor Commission, it takes, it's slow. And so this is a way that businesses are trying to stop activism, and it's another way to suppress workers and to also create fear as well. So I did want to say that we're seeing it, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of it. I work with the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking, and I work on labor trafficking issues. And yes, there's servile marriage issues, there's domestic violence and labor trafficking, and people are afraid to speak up on that. That's true, but I'll let Rebecca answer the other part.
Conventions at Moscone Center. We've been kicked off of the Yerba Buena Gardens area. We've been kicked off of the streets, but we've had a number of rallies and as well as at the conventions, as well as at like shareholder meetings. The movement we were able to make with Apple and their security guards, although not ideal, was the day of their shareholders meeting when we were going to do some civil disobedience there on their campus. They coincidentally moved and gave in to our demands on that day when we started setting up tent cities. So we know, to take full advantage of, as often as we can, of being in the heart of Silicon Valley and having, so many tech workers around us and so many conventions and, other opportunities. Thank you.
The question that was raised on the H-1B and domestic abuse is a valid one, particularly considering that most of the tech workers are men, and because of that, most of the H-1B workers are also men. And when they often bring their spouse from their home countries, the spouse is brought here on a H-4 visa, which allows them to live with their husbands, but they cannot find work on the H-4 visa. So, and because the U.S. immigration system is set up such a way that it'll take the husband and the wife 10, 15 years to get a green card for if you're from India or China. So often the woman, most of the time, is on the H-4 for 10, 15 years. She can't work, and she has to give up her career in order to live in the United States with her husband. And in those types of situations, if there is a domestic violence problem with the husband, then the woman is in a difficult situation. And most of the time it's an information problem, because the U.S. laws do provide protections where if there's a domestic violence situation, the woman can still find residency. There's a way for her, but oftentimes it's an information problem that they don't have access to organizations that will provide them the needed legal information so they can fight it. So thanks so much to the work that people like Ruth are doing, it will help women in that kind of situation. Yeah.